Well, hello again. So, for me, as one who plays games, and as a group, as us gamers, we can go over all of the technical details we like. Resident Evil 3 Remake is a beautiful game. It runs very well. So, technically, Resident Evil 3 is, a good game. But gaming is about more than that, and that's what I want to talk about. It's about how the games make you feel. It's about how zen you become while playing the games. How well the games can adopt you into their world, into their characters, into their sounds. It's about those, excuse me, it's about those intangibles that games have to offer. Now, obviously, a game needs to run well for people to want to play it, and to achieve that level of zen that every game has the potential to. But I'm more interested, as I said, in those intangibles that games offer. The classic reference to this intangible feeling for me and many others comes in the form of Breath of the Wild, which is a game I don't love as much as others. But the first time I left the Shrine of Awakening, I just left full of wonder, walking out on the Great Plateau, excuse me, looking out over the expanse, looking at Death Mountain, seeing the old man down there, knowing my journey was set to begin, seeing the rundown Temple of Time, seeing Hyrule Castle swarmed in darkness. I'm amazed by that feeling, and so many things have to come together to make someone feel that way. And to me, that is the beauty of gaming as an art form and the ultimate sense of immersion. When I walk out there onto that Great Plateau, I'm no longer sitting on my couch or in a chair playing this game. I'm Link. That's my adventure. I'm the hero. And so for me, when I play a game, the question is, how well does a game harbor and nurture that feeling of wonder, mystery, and motivation that I felt when I played that game for the first time? I'm a writer at heart, so I lean more into the art, the characters, the feelings, and the intangibles, rather than those technical aspects I was talking about. Now, of course, they do need to come together, otherwise the art, the feelings, those intangibles will be impossible to convey because, the frame rate's stuttering, or the graphics are so terrible none of the beauty is apparent. It's hard to measure those intangibles, but that's what we're here for. How believable is the world of Resident Evil 3 Remake? To answer that quickly, not very. There's a line that some games walk, like if we're playing, for a few examples, Dragon Age Origins or Breath of the Wild, then we're not expecting realism, but rather immersion. With games like Resident Evil 3 Remake, there should be a blend of realism and creativity, in my opinion. If it feels real, then it feels scary. If we're walking through Raccoon City and it feels like those people walking around were once people, if we look at them and we sense some form of humanity left in their movements or in certain cinematics or the sounds, any of the pieces that come together to make a game, if there's something grounding that world and grounding us into that world, if those footsteps of Nemesis just behind us really feel like they're just behind us, and if the impact of those sound like they're coming from an actual monster rather than a bit of a goofball mummy who can't kill one random lady dozens of times, then we might actually be scared. Don't get me wrong, the first time I was chased by Nemesis, I was so sure I'd taken the perfect angle to outrun him. I'm sure as we all were. And then I heard the rapid pace of his steps as he so casually caught up to me. And then he destroyed me. It was terrifying. But after a few times, and after I survived him smashing me against multiple walls, grabbing my skull, strangling me, and outrunning him at 10 times the size and on 4 legs, then he lost his impact by, 3/4 of the way through the story. And especially on my second playthrough. Whereas on my second playthrough of Resident Evil 2 Remake, Mr. X is almost just as terrifying. You do realize you can kind of mess with him a little bit, but still, Nemesis almost immediately loses that impact when you realize the gig is up. He's kind of silly. Even the first cinematic, when he has Jill up against a wall, throws her against a wall, and then he has her head up against a wall. That immediately makes him look weak. He doesn't physically look weak, but his actual powers aren't strong enough to take her out in that moment. It's confusing. And it's not done well for someone whose name is Nemesis. This was a creature created to kill STARS members. There are times in the game when he whispers STARS, and it almost made me chuckle, because he's failing at his one purpose, the one word he says. He's bloodthirsty for Jill's blood, for my blood, and he can't get it. So what's he good for, and how am I supposed to think he's scary? So that the believability of the world is really lacking when this is a game that truly revolves around Nemesis. And Nemesis is small and weak enough that he doesn't carry enough gravity for anything to revolve around him. So, don't get me wrong, I feel I understand the nature of Resident Evil isn't the most serious, and even the earliest games were about, ridiculous boss fights, giant spiders, crazy, goofy monsters just like that. Some of it was just about the spectacle that, Resident Evil created. But in regards to Resident Evil 3 Remake, which takes place in the same area as Resident Evil 2 Remake, or, whether you want to talk about the originals, they take place in the same area, Raccoon City, at the same time as well. They really tainted the best part of the game and what makes Resident Evil 3 Resident Evil 3, which truly is, I'd say besides Jill, is Nemesis. In regards to Jill and Carlos, they are money, especially Carlos. There's something about Carlos. It's really the look in his eyes. He's a beautiful man, I'll say it. The way he looks at things is so caring, and the way that they, sort of reimagined Carlos and brought him to life in this game, it's just really well done. His interactions, you weren't sure he has his aspects where, especially when you first meet him, he appears to be a tool, but then as you play as him, as you see his interactions with Jill and with his partners, and just the care in his eyes when he's realized multiple things throughout the story, but specifically when you find the doctor and he's devastated when the doctor's dead, when he knows what Nikolai's done and how they're in danger. You know, he's a really well done character in the same way that the lack of care in Nemesis's eyes and Nikolai's also are, you know, their strongest, some of their strongest physical traits. They truly do look evil, both of them in very different ways. And then Carlos really has a compassion that he carries with him. And, you know, that just goes to show what this game did right. It did right. You know, specifically the sound and the design of the characters. The story, to a degree. The characters in the game are just so real, even if what they're doing is certainly not, and the plot doesn't quite stand up to how ambitiously they made the characters. You know, for $40, which is what the game came out at, it offers a compelling enough story in a world that is captivating, but not believable. And to me, I think it has to be believable in a sense. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to believe that Raccoon City exists, but this a Resident Evil game like this specifically to be at its, you know, highest potency requires the player to forget. Again, it requires the player to forget that there is a world around them. You don't have to believe that Raccoon City exists, but you do have to believe that Raccoon City is more believable than the world around you, you know, subconsciously. If that makes sense, I hope that makes sense. It's really immersion, you know. In a lot of other words, it's how immersive the game is. But for the 8 hours, generously, 8 hours, the game does capture my attention anyway, and provides us with another piece of the Resident Evil world that we should appreciate, I believe. And I think that people did. It was just how short it was and the price tag and how much they messed with the formula. You know, I do think that people appreciated it, but if not, I do believe we should. I don't want to straw man any false arguments in here. I do feel like I've provided some of the primary arguments against it, and I think that all of them are valid. I know that the game isn't hated. I know it's primarily because of the linearity, the length of the game, and the price tag. Those are being the three pillars of players' disagreements with the game. But this particular video is about the art as it is, regardless of price. And it's not a review or a critique. It's a journey and an exploration, rather. What is Resident Evil 3 doing to us? What do we become when we play Resident Evil 3? Are we another member of the STARS squad in Raccoon City? Or are we on a couch in a living room or at a desk? The game tackles morality as most games in the series do, I'd say. It's the beauty of an apocalyptic setting. You can pose the player with moral choices, or if not giving them the choices, you can watch others make those so you learn more about the characters really effectively. Nikolai is evil because of that device. Carlos is good because of that device. When lives are on the line, they show their true character. Jill too. The game does continue its constant example of goofiness that isn't in the usual style of Resident Evil humor like in 4. Jill's arms swinging around like they're broken is another example. It's a design choice. I'm not sure why it's like that. Maybe that's just me. It's a nitpick, but those little details where Jill's just had her neck bitten and thrown a zombie off, and then all of a sudden her arm's rubber and broken. What happened, Jill? You know, this story where everyone separates and then keep coming together and trusting each other and not trusting each other is just too chaotic, I'd say. Carlos at one point is doing everything he can to protect Jill from an onslaught, and he's just going full badass horde mode, fending off waves of zombies, dodging and punching them. It's epic, but it's a reminder that this isn't Resident Evil as we know it or wanted it, really. It's still baffling how it's taking place in the same night as Resident Evil 2. It's too jarring, especially this coming fresh off the heels of Resident Evil 2 Remake, as I said earlier. Alright, so here we are. The answer to the prompt of the video. How zen is Resident Evil 3? It's pretty zen, I'd say. When this game has you locked in, surround sound, your flashlight's on in the city or the hospital, and you're walking around looking for items, then you're pretty zenned out as a player. You're locked in. You're focused. You're feeling afraid. It's so immersive, and you feel like the city is collapsing around you, if not physically, then emotionally. The boss fights and other ridiculous sequences remove that zen a bit, and like I said, they do have a place in the Resident Evil universe, but these particular ones are primarily boss fights with Nemesis, and all they do is make him seem weaker, because he never really feels like a threat in most of those boss fights. So that takes the player out of it quite a bit, because your greatest enemy, the largest threat looming over you in Raccoon City that's hunting you down, trying to kill you, can't do it, 4 or 5 boss fights in. It's the moment when zombies are screaming in your ears, when Nemesis is stomping towards you, hungry for blood, when Carlos is staring into Jill's eyes and reminding himself why he thinks he's fighting the greater good, that we become another member of Raccoon City. That's it. That's the zen. Resident Evil 3 Remake is an 8 out of zen. I won't break it down into specific examples because I've talked about it a bit now, and I feel like that defeats the purpose a bit. But when I'm a player walking through experiencing Resident Evil 3 as it is, gameplay to gameplay, scene to scene, moment to moment, when I'm not fighting Nemesis, running along walls like a dog, spitting acid at me, goofily rushing at me on top of a rooftop, then I feel this game is truly a very zen experience. So we're going to go with an 8 out of zen this time. Thanks so much for listening, guys. This is my first video. I don't know what to expect. I know that I really like to, I really like to listen and watch stuff like this, so I just thought I'd try my hand because I have a lot of thoughts and play a lot of games myself. So anyway, thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next one, hopefully. Thank you. To a cinematic, psychological suspense thriller game that was, more about the set pieces than the horror, the evil, the Resident Evil, it seems. So, I just wanted to revisit the game,